When most people think of Neanderthals, they often picture a brutish-looking semi-ape human banging two rocks together. But this couldn't be further from the truth. Though they did create stone tools using a percussive method called flint knapping, it was methodical and strategic. Their intelligence and sociality were also much more complex than you may think. Physically, they didn't look much different from us. In fact, Neanderthals were more similar to us than they were to chimpanzees or more ancient hominins. Partly what made them so human-like were their near-modern behaviors that began with Homo erectus and continued through us. They were an exploratory species, and their adventurous nature is what inspired this video. They traveled far and wide, hunting and gathering in groups. From Siberia to France and Spain, we have evidence of Neanderthals across Eurasia. They managed to not only survive in these newly explored lands, but also develop symbolism and complex cultural practices. Europe, in particular, has produced great quantities of Neanderthal remains and artifacts, but how far back do they go? What evidence do we have of these early pioneers carving out their lives on this continent? In this video, we'll explore who these ancient travelers were and how far back we can trace their lineage in Europe. To begin, let's dive into the biological and cultural traits that define this fascinating species. We are currently the only living human species on the planet, but this was not always the norm. Before about 50,000 years ago, various human species walked the earth. Some even crossed the seas. It is widely accepted that we all originated in Africa, but different species migrated to new continents at different times. In the context of this discussion, three species in particular are important: Homo erectus, Homo neanderthalensis, aka Neanderthals, and Homo sapiens, us. All three fall under the genus Homo, a genus that began to appear in Africa between 3 and 2.5 million years ago. We are roughly defined by our capacity to walk on two legs habitually, and a combination of our tool use and hunting and gathering subsistence strategies. Homo erectus is the oldest and longest lived, having existed from about 1.9 million to 100,000 years ago. Also, they were the first species to widely diffuse out of Africa, inhabiting parts of Asia, Europe, and the Middle East. I just made a video on them, and I'll leave a link to that in the description. The waters are murky when deciphering the transition from Homo erectus to more modern human forms. Many anthropologists suggest that Neanderthals and modern humans are direct descendants of erectus, the former evolving from the Homo erectus populations that migrated to Europe, while those evolving into us remained in Africa. This is largely consistent with the prominence of Neanderthal fossils across Europe, and the oldest evidence of anatomically modern humans coming from Morocco, Africa, dating to 300,000 years ago. Others believe that there were more transitionary forms in between, like Homo heidelbergensis, which we will touch on again later in the video. According to a genome sequence taken from a Siberian Neanderthal woman's toe bone, it is likely that all anatomically modern humans and Neanderthals share a common ancestor from around 550,000 years ago. With this evidence in hand, we can safely say that by around 500,000 years ago, anatomically modern humans were still taking shape in Africa, and Neanderthals were likely paving their path into Eurasia. Hundreds of thousands of years later, when anatomically modern humans left Africa, our two species met again, resulting in interbreeding and the integration of Neanderthal DNA into our own, which I'm sure you've heard we now have evidence of. This overlap in time, geography, and genetics shows that the line between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals is not so obvious, and it's still debated. Are we actually two separate species, or were Neanderthals just a variant of Homo sapiens adapting to European climates? Let me know what you think in the comments. So, how did they differ from us? Physically, the commonalities outweigh the differences. We share walking on two legs with an upright posture. We share having reduced body hair compared to our earlier hominin ancestors. We share having longer legs than arms. The differences are few, but notable. The first thing you would probably notice if you were to see a Neanderthal walking down the street is their face and head. Compared to modern humans, Neanderthals had more prominent brow ridges with more shallow foreheads, larger noses, a prognathic lower face and jaw lacking a chin, and a much longer occipital bone, meaning the back of their skulls extended further, giving them more of a football shape. The second difference your eyes would latch onto is their body shape. They are much stouter than the typical person today. The conventional viewpoint has been that this is an adaptation to the colder climates of Eurasia. Shorter, wider bodies with shorter limbs are better for conserving heat. A more recent hypothesis argues that the climates Neanderthals evolved in were not as cold as we thought. On the contrary, the hypothesized woodland environments they lived in required sprinting and ambushing strategies for hunting, rather than the endurance strategies of anatomically modern humans in Africa. Their stockier, more muscular body types would have been favored for quick bursts of power. Socially, Neanderthals likely lived in smaller groups than anatomically modern humans. One archaeological study of footprints from an occupational site in France suggests that this particular group of Neanderthals consisted of only 10 to 13 individuals. Some historians and researchers suggest that this difference in group size, in addition to our storytelling abilities, is what resulted in our species' success over the Neanderthals. This claim has some validity, considering that our two species' tool technologies were somewhat comparable at the time. The stone tool industry that is most associated with Neanderthals is called the Mousterian complex, and the stone shaping technique they use is called the Lavawa technique. The archaeologist Stephen Nash describes this technique as such. The tool maker takes an oblong, relatively flat flint nodule and strikes flakes off the thinner sides of the core all the way around its circumference. She then flips the nodule over and strikes flakes off its front side, then flips it again to do the same thing on the back. Finally, and after a lot of such preparation, the toolmaker strikes one end of the core to remove a large and distinctive lavawa flake off its front. By design, the edge of the lavawa flake will follow the contours of the previous flake scars, creating a very nice, thin, and predictably shaped tool. He goes on to say, the technique is anything but expedient. It takes time, effort, and skill to craft a lavawa core. Their ability to craft these stone tools is emblematic of their intelligence and big brains. Additionally, they likely modified these tools slightly to adapt them to different tasks, such as butchering animals, hafting them to spears, and processing plant remains. Adjacent to their advanced stone tools of the time, they also produced symbolic art and likely language. Red ochre, a symbolic pigment, was used widely by Neanderthals throughout Europe and was sometimes transported long distances, indicating that they were migrating with such resources. Archaeologists have found marine shells with red ochre pigment painted on them in Neanderthal contexts. They even buried their dead in some cases, indicative of modern human ritual behavior. The evidence for language is less clear, but one study in particular has shown that the hyoid bone of Neanderthals, which helps produce speech, is nearly identical to that of anatomically modern humans. We see major declines in Neanderthal evidence around 40,000 years ago, and they were likely totally gone by 35,000 years ago. Given their extensive use of material culture and other similarities to modern people, why did they go extinct? What caused their demise? This is a hotly debated topic in the scientific community, but more and more evidence suggests that we didn't just migrate into their lands, raid their camps, and end them with sheer force. Instead, studies suggest that Neanderthals may have gone extinct by no fault but their own. This is due to a lack of genetic diversity within their gene pool, especially when compared to anatomically modern humans. Low genetic diversity within a population essentially means that harmful genes can perpetuate, because there are no adaptive alternatives to replace them. Once large groups of diverse Homo sapiens entered Eurasia, they would have outcompeted the already diminishing Neanderthals without the use of violence, even integrating some Neanderthal DNA, as discussed earlier. So now that we have a decent overview of the Neanderthal story and what they were like anatomically and culturally, let's see how far back we can find evidence of their presence in Europe. Before that, if you're finding this video valuable, make sure you sign up for my free newsletter in the description to grab a copy of my archaeology cheat sheet. Subscribers to the Point 2 newsletter stay up to date on all Evolve Point 2 content and get bonus content related to my personal research. Also, I'm proud to announce my new ebook, Archaeology 101, which is now available for purchase. The link to this will also be in the description. With that out of the way, let's start digging into some specific archaeological sites. In 1908, in the small village of La Chapelle in France, two amateur archaeologists made a groundbreaking discovery that would change how we understand Neanderthals forever. Buried in a shallow depression in the ground was one of the most complete Neanderthal skeletons ever found, known as the Old Man of La Chapelle. This individual, who lived around 60,000 years ago, provided critical insights into Neanderthal anatomy, behavior, and even their social structures. The quote-unquote old man was an elderly male estimated to be between 40 and 50 years old, a significant age for a Neanderthal. His skeleton tells a remarkable story. He suffered from severe arthritis, had lost many of his teeth, and likely struggled with mobility in his later years. Despite these challenges, he survived for decades, which suggests that his community cared for him, providing food and support when he could no longer fend for himself. This discovery shattered the stereotype of Neanderthals as brutish loners, instead revealing them as compassionate social beings. But what truly set this discovery apart was the context of the burial. The skeleton was found in a possibly deliberate depression, raising the idea that this Neanderthal was intentionally buried, a practice once thought to be unique to modern humans. If true, this suggests that Neanderthals may have engaged in symbolic behavior, perhaps even possessing spiritual or religious beliefs. Inevitably, this was a controversial claim when first proposed, and debates have ensued ever since. People have critiqued the initial excavation methods used to recover Old Man, suggesting they may not have been sufficiently rigorous to make a burial determination. However, more recent excavations and skeletal analyses have found that the soil deposits show signs of burial and the bones appear to have been buried quickly. Additionally, other Neanderthal burials discovered since have strengthened the case for funerary practices here. La Chapelle may not be the oldest site we'll discuss in this video, but it remains one of the most important Neanderthal discoveries ever made. It provides not only a glimpse into their physical characteristics, but also into their humanity, how they may have cared for one another, and perhaps even how they confronted the mysteries of death. This site serves as a powerful reminder that Neanderthals were far more complex than crude caricatures of the past. While staying in France, we find another magnificent Neanderthal site. Nestled in the Dordogne region of southwestern France, the La Ferrassie rock shelter is one of the most significant Neanderthal sites ever discovered. Excavated around the same time as La Chapelle, this site revealed an astonishing array of Neanderthal remains. La Ferrassie actually consists of 3 different sites: a small shelter, a cave, and a big shelter, also known as Grand Abri. Grand Abri contains the remains of at least 7 Neanderthals, including 2 adults, several children, and even an infant. Among them is the skeleton known as La Ferrassie 1, a remarkably well-preserved adult male. His robust, muscular build and distinctive Neanderthal features, such as a prominent brow ridge and large nasal aperture, are textbook examples of their adaptations to the harsh Ice Age climate. We also know he suffered from illness and disease, showing evidence of trauma lesions and a likely pulmonary disease. Alongside him was an adult female, as well as the graves of those several children and an infant, which may represent a family or closely connected group. The child and infant burials at La Ferrassie are especially poignant. The graves highlight the emotional and social bonds within the Neanderthal communities, showing that even their youngest members were treated with care and respect. Some researchers believe that the inclusion of tools in the graves reflects a deeper meaning, perhaps tied to their beliefs about death or an early form of spirituality. What makes La Ferrassie so extraordinary are its layers of cultural habitation. Like layers of a cake, the soil here tells a story of humans adding their presence to the site over many years. Recent luminescence dating places these human remains somewhere between 54,000 and 40,000 years ago. However, there is evidence of people above and below these remains. The site yielded numerous Mousterian tools, including Lavawa scrapers and bifaces, showcasing the technological sophistication of Neanderthals. These expertly crafted tools were used for tasks like butchering animals, preparing hides, and woodworking, reflecting their ingenuity and adaptability. At the base of the cultural stratigraphy here, an assemblage of the Mousterian tools has produced dates as old as 93,000 years ago, possibly double the age of the bone remains themselves. Younger than the Neanderthal individuals, stratigraphically, are the remnants of an ancient Homo sapiens culture called the Aurignacian culture, dating to around 42,000 years ago. Associated with some of the first anatomically modern humans establishing themselves in Europe, the Aurignacian marks a significant leap in symbolic behavior and technology. It was characterized by long, thin stone blades, bone and antler tools, and personal ornamentations like beads. This culture is also linked to early cave art, such as the paintings in Chauvet Cave. It's a powerful image to think of these ancient humans walking around and working on a ground under which they had no clue Neanderthals had buried their dead thousands of years earlier. La Ferrassie remains a cornerstone of Neanderthal research in Europe. La Ferrassie 1 represents a near-complete skeleton, one depicting archetypal Neanderthal anatomy, but also the struggles they faced. The discoveries of here paint a picture of a Neanderthal community that cared for its members and honored its dead. But the stone tools here, dated to around 90,000 years ago, suggest that La Ferrassie 1 was not the first Neanderthal inhabitant of this site. Traveling to the east, and even further back in time, we arrive at a site that elicits insights into Neanderthal life we have yet to dive into. Located in modern-day Croatia, the site of Krapina was discovered in 1899 and is one of the most extensive Neanderthal sites in the world. It consists of a collapsed cave looking over a river. It was once home to many prehistoric humans, with fossil evidence of at least 24 Neanderthal individuals. The site dates to roughly 130,000 years ago, certainly making it one of the oldest Neanderthal discoveries in Europe. Possibly more interesting than the huge assemblage of human remains, however, is the evidence of very specific cultural practices. First are the artifacts. Of course, there are the typical stone tools, but there is also evidence of prehistoric jewelry. Here, archaeologists have uncovered 8 white-tailed eagle talons within a single soil level dating to this 130,000-year mark. Importantly, the talons bear evidence of anthropogenic modifications. These include cut marks, polishing facets and/or abrasions, and small notches. More recent studies have provided even more information on how these talons were used as jewelry. Using infrared spectrometry and other magnification methods on one of the talons, researchers found fibers adhered to the surface of a cut mark. The fiber was derived from animal sinew, which they determined based on protein analysis. They proposed that this is most likely a remnant of the leather or sinew string binding it together with the other talons. The discovery of ochre and charcoal further supports the idea that these artifacts held symbolic meaning for the humans who made and wore them. There is a darker side to the Krapina site, though. Here is a quote from the archaeologist who originally excavated the site, whose name I unfortunately cannot pronounce. It is difficult to imagine early man from Krapina enjoying the wealth of his hunt in peace and undisturbed. No doubt he was attacked on his territory from time to time by neighboring hordes who may not have had such abundant hunting grounds. People fell on each side, and the victors proceeded with the dead as they did with the catch from a good hunt. He's referring here to the possibility of cannibalism. Archaeologists recognize interesting marks and modifications to the human skeletal remains at Krapina, even at its earliest stages of excavation. The bones seem to have fragmented and burned in ways that indicate cannibalistic behavior. Herbert Ulrich has documented some of these patterns, which consist of disarticulation, cut marks at sites of muscle, tendon, and ligament attachment, and bone breakages that indicate marrow extraction. Despite these observations, other researchers have posed various hypotheses to explain the marks. suggesting that they could be related to the cave roof falling in, denning cave bears, or preparation for secondary burials. That said, the marks are consistent with butchery marks found at other archaeological sites. Did cannibalism take place at Krapina 130,000 years ago? Did Neanderthals engage in rituals that included defleshing the dead and breaking their bones? What do you think? These debates continue to challenge and refine our understanding of these close relatives of ours, showcasing their humanity, uniqueness, and even their frightening side. Moving on, as we go further back in time, you will see that these sites become more controversial, as it is not so obvious whether they can be attributed to Neanderthals or even earlier human species. Our next site brings us close to the edge of the Neanderthal debate in terms of what defines the species and its presence in Europe. In the Atapuerca Mountains of north-central Spain sits an enigmatic site that blurs the line between Neanderthals and more ancestral species. It's known as Sima de los Huesos, which translates to pit of bones or chasm of bones. I'm sure you can infer why, but let's explore what gave it its name. The Pit of Bones is located within the Cueva Mayor cave system, over half a kilometer from the entrance. After traversing a labyrinth of passages and vertical shafts, you arrive at a sediment-filled chamber, where archaeological excavations have revealed an interesting assemblage of bones. First, they found sediment layers containing Middle Pleistocene cave bear bones. Using uranium series dating, researchers determined the oldest cave bear bones to be approximately 320,000 years old. Below the bear remains were hominin bones, suggesting they could be even older. The dates for these bones are still debated, but the consensus is generally looking at a time of around 430,000 years ago, hence where the problem of interpreting the site lies. 430,000 years ago would mark a very long time ago for the appearance of Neanderthals in Europe. This would be close to the very beginning of the species' existence, leading some researchers to believe they actually belong to Homo heidelbergensis. Traditionally, Homo heidelbergensis has been considered a transitional species between Homo erectus and Neanderthals that existed between roughly 600,000 and 300,000 years ago. The remains at the Pit of Bones exhibit a mix of traits from both Neanderthals and heidelbergensis, making interpretations even more difficult. For example, the extended occipital bone of Neanderthals, which elongated their skulls, is a defining trait of the species, yet that bone of these skulls aren't too exaggerated. On the front side of the face are the more Neanderthal-like features. Their teeth are more in line with the dentition of Neanderthals. Their mid-face regions are more prognathic, and their mandibles, or lower jaws, are nearly identical to those of Neanderthals. Most recently, a team of evolutionary geneticists, archaeologists, and other specialists analyzed genome sequences sampled from leg bones and teeth recovered from the Pit of Bones. What they discovered was especially insightful. They found a close relation to Neanderthal DNA. But even they recognized that the nuclear DNA sequences of femur AT5431 and the incisor show that they belonged to the Neanderthal evolutionary lineage, and the limited data available for the molar suggests that the same is true for this specimen. Thus, the results show that the Sima de los Huesos hominins were early Neanderthals or closely related to the ancestors of Neanderthals after the divergence from a common ancestor shared with Denisovans. So even the genetic data from the Pit of Bones remains aren't totally conclusive. By the way, I know I kind of just skimmed over the Denisovan comment, but that's a deep rabbit hole in and of itself. If you want me to make a video on that ancient human species, let me know in the comments below. That said, let's move on to our final archaeological site, one that will continue to help us understand how far back we can trace Neanderthals in Europe. The Mauer site, located near Heidelberg, Germany, is one of the most important paleoanthropological sites in Europe. It is known for yielding the famous Mauer 1 mandible, discovered in 1907 by a worker in a sand quarry. This lower jaw, which lacked a chin and had massive, thick-walled teeth, was unlike any modern human specimen. It was later assigned to Homo heidelbergensis, making it the type specimen for this species. The Mauer sands, the sediments in which the jawbone was found, are fascinating. These deposits largely consist of sands, obviously, and gravels. which were transported and laid here by a river many thousands of years ago. How many thousands was important for interpreting this bone, and will help us understand the time frame of Neanderthals in Europe. There are three important layers of sediment: the upper sands, the lower sands, and a band of clay and silt that separates the two, known as the Lenton Banks. The Mauer 1 mandible was found in the lower sands. Before the radiometric dating study we will discuss shortly, the other faunal remains within the lower sands were used to determine the deposit's antiquity. These included paleo species related to elephants, rhinos, and bison. Judging by the presence of these species, it was estimated that the lower sands were associated with the Middle Pleistocene, between 563 and 621,000 years ago. Similar to Sima de los Huesos, uranium series and other radiometric dating techniques were used to test these age estimates. Lo and behold, they produced a date of around 600,000 years ago, making Mauer 1 the oldest hominin fossil ever discovered in Germany. So why does the Mauer site matter in the context of our hunt for the oldest evidence of Neanderthals in Europe? Because it represents evidence of a Neanderthal precursor. Mauer provides a crucial early bracket for Neanderthal evolution. Since the Mauer mandible dates to around 600,000 years ago, it suggests that Homo heidelbergensis was already present in Europe at this time, forming the basis for Neanderthal ancestry. Over the next several thousand years, European populations of Homo heidelbergensis adapted to the Ice Age conditions, gradually acquiring the classic Neanderthal traits. It represents an early phase in the evolution of European hominins that later became Neanderthals. It helps define the lower time boundary for Neanderthal emergence. Since Neanderthals show up more clearly in the fossil record by around 400,000 years ago at places like Sima de los Huesos, Mauer helps establish that their lineage had already begun to diverge by 600,000 years ago, and it solidifies Homo heidelbergensis as this key transitional species whose physical characteristics are becoming Neanderthal-like. Essentially, Mauer acts as a reference point for the start of the Neanderthal lineage, placing this evolutionary shift to some time after 600,000 years ago. Neanderthals weren't just some primitive side branch of human evolution. They were intelligent, adaptable, and left an undeniable impact in our DNA and history. This mosaic of evolutionary traits between all of these archaeological sites shows us a story that is complex and far from understood. We don't have a great grasp on the actual origin of Neanderthals in Europe. More research is needed to unpack and unravel this complexity. But the more we uncover, the more we realize that their story isn't just about extinction. It's about survival, adaptation, and what it means to be human. We've reconstructed their tools, social lives, and burial rituals, but there's still so much we don't know. Were they actually capable of symbolic thought? How did they truly interact with early Homo sapiens? And how much of their legacy still lives on within us? The story of Neanderthals and our hunt for their oldest evidence in Europe is far from over. The discoveries at sites like La Ferrassie, Krapina, and Sima de los Huesos continue to challenge our understanding of the past, but there's still so much to learn. If you want to keep diving into the mysteries of human evolution, check out my video on Homo erectus on the screen. Their story is just as fascinating, if not more. Remember to like and subscribe if you found this video interesting. It really helps the channel. And make sure you check out my newsletter in the description to explore archaeology beyond the confines of the channel. I'll see you in the next video. Stay curious.